Hello and welcome back to Books Yada Yada. I'm Dina, and today we're going to discuss my August mid-month wrap-up. Yes. So I read 7 books starting August 1st, well, somewhere around there, to today. I finished the last one this morning. So I'm going to be going over 7 books. I'm going to try to make this as short as I can because that's a lot of books to review. So let's get started. All right, so the first book that I read this month was a book, I've got all my Post-it notes all over the place, was a book called Wine and Punishment by Sarah Fox, okay? So this book really appealed to me for its setting, as I mentioned in my August TBR. So I went all over all the books that I'd be reading, and the reason that it appealed to me is because of the setting. It takes place in Vermont. It takes place in a literary pub. And, you know, I thought that was a great concept. Well, this book sucked. Okay, it was terrible. I hated it. I do not like giving negative reviews. You're not going to hear me give a lot of negative reviews at all. But because this was a part of my August TBR, I had to include it because I wasn't not going to. If I said I was going to review it, then, you know, I'm going to commit to that. I did not like it at all. The writer doesn't talk about Vermont very much. She doesn't really talk about the literary pub very much. Not much happens there. The premise is that we have a woman who leaves Boston because she loses her job and breaks up with her boyfriend, who's a gambling addict, and moves to Vermont, renovates an old grist mill, turns it into a literary pub, meets the locals, yada, yada, yada. Turns out the boyfriend comes to see her and gets killed in the process, and she becomes a suspect at some point, and then it just goes all over the place, and it just was not very good. And the reason being is that, you know, it's a typical cozy, but it's too saccharine. Like the other two that I read The Coffee House Mysteries by Cleo Coyle and Booktown Mysteries by Lorna Barnett. And those are, you know, they're cozy, they're sweet, and they're fluffy, and they're you know, very light reads, but they're not overly sweet. Like you're at the carnival and you want to like throw up after you went off on the what's the fast one? The Gravitron. The Gravitron. You know what I mean? So this one, I just hated all the characters. Ugh, the lead, the main protagonist, says things like, "Oh, what the Charles Dickens?" and "Holy Agatha Christie." Like, I don't know. I've never even read anybody being that silly in a cozy mystery before. I just didn't like her. She was so annoying. She was constantly like doing the most incredibly dumb things, and quite frankly, she was a dingbat. So I didn't like this book. I wouldn't suggest it. It wasn't very good at all, and you know, it wasn't even that mysterious, to be quite frank. So okay, so the next book that I read was The Progeny by Tosca Lee. Oh, this was a breath of fresh air. After reading Wine and Punishment, we won't go there again. So this book, premise is a descendant of the Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian countess who was the most prolific female serial killer in all of history. So she was an actual person. She really did exist, and she would kill young virgins and bathe in their blood to sort of extend her own life. I'm not going to get too much into that. And that's what I liked about this book, is that Tosca Lee didn't go into too much of the Blood Countess's history and what she did, the acts. She didn't go on and on and on about all of it. There's a little bit, but not too much. You're following this descendant of the Blood Countess, and she basically wakes up in a cabin in Maine, has selectively had her mind erased. She kind of has some idea of what she has done to herself, but she's just trying to create a life, and that's really all she knows. She's just trying to create a life in Maine and start over again, but she doesn't really know exactly why she chose to do that. And it takes you from Maine to Indiana, briefly, and then to Europe. So you're covering, and I liked about it is that there was actually a little map in the book of all the different places that our female or our protagonist goes. And her name is, well, I'm not going to say what her name is because it does change, so I'm not going to even bother. But those are the different places in Europe that she's traveling to because she's trying to escape a secret society that are dead set on eliminating all of Elizabeth Bathory's descendants. So she is on the run, and I love books like that. I love books where people are just living on the edge of their seat. They are on the run. They are trying to escape from somebody or something, and you never know exactly where they're going or when they're going to have to go. So that appealed to me a great deal. I loved this book. It was a quick read. It was like 310 pages or something like that. So loved it. There's a sequel to this book, so it definitely ends on a cliffhanger. I loved our protagonist. She was very smart. There's a lot of other things that go on in the book, and I am not going to give away any spoilers because I know I will. So I'm not, but just read it. It was very good. And they're actually, I found out, they're making this into a TV. Somebody is adapting this to television. So with all this COVID stuff going on, who knows when that's going to happen? But it has been picked up, I guess, and is being in the works of being adapted. So good job, Toscali, the progeny. Loved it. All right, next book, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This was a great book. It didn't get the greatest reviews on Goodreads. I think I got like a 3 point something. I don't really pay attention to Goodreads. You know what I mean? I like those books that I actually tend to read the books that don't get very high ratings because, you know, sometimes I like to go kind of swim against the current sometimes and read stuff that, you know, isn't really mainstream or people didn't like because I'm weird and I like that kind of stuff. I guess something in me just goes in the opposite direction. And that can be said for most of my life. But anyhow, so this book was awesome. We have a family who is from Boston. Again, it's a recurring theme. From Boston, they decide to take a family vacation and rent this cabin, remote cabin, somewhere in New Hampshire that is very isolated. You have Eric, Andrew, and Wen. So we have dads, Eric and Andrew, and their little girl, Wen, who's 7 years old. And I loved Wen. She was just the sweetest little girl, very highly intelligent for a 7-year-old, extremely precocious. You just fall in love with her character. Wen is playing outside in the front of the cabin. Eric and Andrew are hanging out in the back by the lake. And you know, it's that kind of place where you don't have to worry about anything. It's a peaceful setting, right? So all of a sudden, these strangers come out of nowhere. One of them starts talking to Wen as she's collecting grasshoppers and keeping a grasshopper journal, which I thought was so endearing and cute. And they slowly start to make her feel very uncomfortable. And they tell her that your parents are not going to like what we have to tell them. So eventually what happens is, not to give too much away, but this family becomes hostage to these strangers. And these strangers tell them that they are going to have to do something that they're not going to want to do. And we don't know why. And I'm trying so hard not to spoil this. We don't know exactly what the purpose or what the point of this group is, or these strangers are. We don't know if they're a hate group, if they are some kind of a cult. You're wondering what is going on, and you're on that ride with Eric, Andrew, and Wen because they don't know either. So Paul Tremblay does a great job of not kind of lulling too much. He doesn't ramble, you know, but he just keeps you going so that you feel like you're in the room with this family, and you're struggling with them. You are trying to figure out how to survive, what to do. The biggest thing that I took away from it was that you have this family that's all they're trying to do is survive. And you have different points of view. You have Eric, Andrew's points of view, you have Wen's points of view, and then even you have some of the strangers' points of view throughout the book. So again, it was a very gripping read. I really picked up on the resilience between Eric and Andrew, and imagined if, you know, what if that was my family? What if that was my husband? And, you know, well, my kids are in their 20s, but still, you know, it doesn't matter. It's like, what if that was my family, you know, and what would we do? So you're just on this journey with them, trying to hang on for dear life, and it's really disturbing. It is very haunting. It's very dark. But if you like that type of thing like I do, you will love this book. So The Cabin at the End of the World, Paul Tremblay. Again, I'm not spoiling anything with this one, so this was a great read. I highly suggest it, and I will definitely be reading more Paul Tremblay. Sometimes I lie, which I do. I'm a master at it. Somebody saw this lying on my, one of our friends came over last week and saw this lying on the counter, and he's like, oh, sometimes I lie. He's like, oh, you're learning. I said, no, I'm a master. I just, you know, I'm picking this up to enhance my skills. Anyway, so Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. Now, if you saw my very first BookTube noob review, I went over His and Hers by Alice Feeney, and that was the first book I read by her. It's her newest book. So I kind of went in reverse with Alice Feeney. I'm not sure exactly. It doesn't matter the order I read them in. Anyway, so this book was a very good read as well. She is just, I can't rave enough about Alice Feeney and her writing. You know, she just has a way with these endings that are just like, whoa, you know, you really you just don't see coming. And that's what she did with this one. Same as His and Hers. I liked His and Hers better, I have to say that. But this one was very, very good. And the premise of this one is basically a woman who wakes up in the hospital. She's in a coma. So it takes place with, the point of views is Amber, who is this woman in coma, pre-coma, presently in coma, and post-coma. So you get these three different, you know, perspectives going on. She doesn't know whether or not to trust her husband, her sister, her colleagues, anybody that is coming in and out of her hospital room. She can hear them, but she cannot move her body. She can't speak. She can't move her eyes or open her eyes. All she can do is hear them, hear the conversations that they're having. You feel Alice Feeney puts you there, puts you in Amber's mind, puts you in that hospital bed. And what would you do if you were in a situation like that? Well, Amber ends up finding out as we get towards the end. And it's also a good thing to mention is that there are some diary journals in here, which is not another point of view, but again, I'm not going to give anything away because I know that I will, but there are diary journals in here. So I'm not going to say who they're by, but anyway, just stick with it. You'll love it. Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. Excellent. The Girls in the Garden by Lisa Jewell. Didn't like it. No. I read The Family Upstairs, which I believe was Lisa Jewell's latest novel. I loved that. So I figured, hey, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through her catalog and read some of her older stuff, and I picked this one because I love the cover. Not the Target thing, but that should have given me an indication. Nothing against Target, but anyway. Oh, I'm bad. So This book just didn't do it for me. I didn't like any of the characters at all. So the first 100 pages of the book, basically, are told in the point of view of a 12-year-old girl. And I thought she was really annoying, to be honest with you. So the premise of the book is you have this family who the father is a paranoid schizophrenic, basically, burns the house down because he thinks that there's alien rats crawling through the walls. And so he gets sent off to a psychiatric center, and the family, the wife and the two daughters, are left behind. And, you know, they have to pick up the pieces. So they move to this place, and it's supposed to be sort of an idyllic setting, neighborhood in somewhere around in London. And, you know, everybody knows everybody, and, you know, you have the town, the neighborhood gossip, and you have the, you know, the neighborhood slut and the neighborhood whatever, the neighborhood pervert. And you follow this family and how they're acclimating, how the daughters are acclimating, and they become friends with some of the other neighbors. It was extremely boring. There were some sexual, predatory, not even undertones. I mean, I'm going to just give that away and say that that's basically what's going on here. Is there's some kind of really sordid things going on in this neighborhood, and it made me feel a little skeevy. I didn't care for it. Not at all. Just didn't cut it for me. So I will be reading more Lisa Jewell, though, because I know her stuff gets better. The Invisible Ones by Steph Penny. So this private detective named Ray gets hired to try to find this missing woman. She had married, they're gypsies, she had married a gypsy and then basically just disappeared. So Ray is trying to find her, and he is half gypsy himself. So I thought that that was interesting. That really kind of drew me to the book when I read the jacket was gypsy, the fact that they were, you know, the plot was, the premise was dealing with gypsies and travelers. And I always have found that very fascinating. And because you don't hear a lot about that subculture. And so I felt that, well, you know, maybe this will delve into that. And it did. However, not to the extent that I would have liked it to. As the story goes along, you get two point of views here. You get the point of view of Ray, our private detective, and a boy, 14-year-old boy named JJ. And I loved JJ's character. And again, this is a recurring theme for this wrap-up, are these like adolescent characters that I really enjoy, which I normally do not. So anyway, but JJ's like a really cool kid. You know, it's the mid-'80s in Wales. I believe this takes place in Wales. And he loves the Smiths, which, you know, he gets right away my love because they're one of my favorite bands. And, you know, he's a really cool kid. So you're wondering why this whole time for like the first half of the book, you're there, you know, the author is giving you the point of view of Ray and the point of view of JJ. Well, JJ is a gypsy, and his family travels, you know, so he doesn't have a lot of stability in his life. But it kind of dragged on. This book is 400 pages long, and to me it should have been like 100 pages shorter. It was okay. It was slightly atmospheric, definitely a mystery, but it just wasn't really that great. The big reveal, if you want to call it that, towards the end, it was just sort of anticlimactic. Steph Penny is a really great author. Her writing, her prose is wonderful, and I think that's what kept me going with the book, is that her writing skills are very, very good. Oh, and you know what? I forgot to mention, with The Invisible Ones, narration was phenomenal. And that's why I stuck with it, was because it was Dan Stevens from Downton Abbey who played Matthew Crawley. He has such a great voice, and he is able to, you'd be surprised if you've never heard him narrate anything, but he has such range in the different dialects that he's able to do, and the different ages, you know, because there's 14-year-old JJ, and then there's 40-year-old Ray, and there's some older people in the book. There's some younger people in the book. There's women in the book. And he does all of them masterfully. So if anything, if you are interested in reading this, I would highly suggest the audiobook. So the next book is The Liar's Girl by Catherine Ryan Howard. Oh, I love her. I love her. I love her the same way I love Alice Feeney. So if you like Alice Feeney, you would definitely like Catherine Ryan Howard. So this book centers around a serial killer in Dublin called the Canal Killer. And you have your main character is Allison. The book is told in the point of view of Allison past, Allison present, and then a couple of other point of views. And one point of view that I'm not going to give it away, but is just really good. So the plot of the book is that Allison is in college in Dublin 10 years before, right? She gets involved with this boy named Will, and they fall in love really quickly and have this, this college romance. And she has this best friend named Liv, who, or Liz, I think it's, yeah, Liz. So Allison's best friend, Liz, they are pretty much inseparable, like two peas in a pod. And what ends up happening is Liz gets killed. So Liz gets killed and Will gets blamed for it and the murders that occurred before that by this canal killer. So he is deemed the canal killer and is sent to a, not prison, but he's sent to a psychiatric facility. So going 10 years forward, Allison just got the hell out of Dublin, right? And decided to move to the Netherlands and settles down there and has a great life. She's working. She's got a great circle of friends. She's doing pretty good, right? And it's almost completely forgotten about the past. Well, not so fast, Allison, because she gets notified by the police. They show up. The Irish police show up in Netherlands, gets a knock at the door saying there's been a copycat killing. We're interviewing Will about this because, he didn't do it, obviously, but somebody is trying to follow his pattern. So he won't talk to us. He said he's only going to talk to you, Allison, right? So Allison reluctantly goes back to Dublin, very hesitantly, to kind of face her ex-boyfriend who is a serial killer, right? So in doing this, she gets enmeshed into the whole investigation. And I really loved her character because she was very strong. She was very fragile at the same time because of everything that had happened in the past. But she hangs on and ends up becoming a critical part of the investigation. Catherine Ryan Howard gets you the same way Alice Feeney does by giving you that extra little punch at the end in the very last stages of the book where you're like, oh my God. So Liar's Girl, Catherine Ryan Howard, excellent read, highly suggested. So thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you the next time.